Welcome to the Art Scene Online Music Business Workshop. I'm your host, Jonathan Shaw, and we are proudly sponsored by the National Arts Council. In this fifth video, we're going to be looking at copyright and especially that in copyrights of musical and literary works. So how do you copyright your musical works? How do you copyright your music in general? Well, that copyright has to be original. It doesn't necessarily need to be new to the world or something that is entirely just outrageous. It just needs to be something that you haven't referenced from somewhere else and you know is pretty much original. Then it must be of sufficient material. It cannot be one chord or three notes. It needs to be a whole work, something that can be recognized as a work. Then it must be in material form, and these days you're looking at a recording of some sort or in music notation or something along those lines. Then it must be authored by a qualified person to fall under the South African copyright law. So musical and literary works, what kind of rights do they have when they fall under copyright? When a work comes into existence because of meeting those criteria, it has the right to be reproduced or copies to be made of that work. And we'll talk more about different types of reproductions in a second. Then we have the right of publishing that work, so taking those copies and meeting the demands of the public. But in this day and age, everything's digital, so that particular right, that clause needs to be changed in some way. Then performing rights, which consist of performing the work in public, so on stage or something like that, broadcasting it on radio and television, and then transmitting the work in a diffusion service, which is over wires, which is really like hotels or some big service that plays music back. But musical and literary works don't really have an internet component. They don't have the right of communication. But most works have to be recorded, and sound recordings do have those rights. Then you have the right to adapt the work, so you can change it. And then, of course, you have the right to control any adaptations that are made to the work. So when you go out and change somebody's work or want to put some of their work, sample it into your music, you're going to have to seek their permission, and they might end up owning the work that you've now changed. So just be careful. Then, if we talk more about reproductions and the type of reproduction, so besides making normal copies and selling them to the public or something like that, we have mechanical licenses, which are automatic licenses. So they're an exception to your monopoly over the rights that you have. So somebody can use the musical work if they apply for the license, and they'll do that through a collective management organization. If the work hasn't been used for the first time, you're going to need to seek permission. But if it has been used and put out into the public, you just pay the royalties, give notice, have an intent to sell or distribute, and all of this does apply to adaptations again. But if you go to your CMO, like Capasso, you can then get the license to use the musical work. Then other reproductions that you may have are synchronizations of the work, which is used for television and films and that sort of thing. And then transcription rights, which are similar but for radio adverts or audio-only transmissions. And then print and reprographic rights, which is books or magazine reproductions that need to include the work in it. And then finally, how do you protect yourself? So you now own a work and you want to get it out to the public. Well, you need to have proof of ownership. So in other words, you need to have some way to show that the work didn't exist before some previous date. So as long as you have some sort of proof that it did exist, you can prove that you were the first owner. Then piracy. It happens in various different ways. But the main way is piracy, so people stealing the work, and then also using the work in other works, which leads to secondary infringement. And of course, knowledge is a big part of this. Our law allows for people that don't know that they're using a copyright work to claim that they had ignorance to begin with. Then, of course, watch out for sampling of the music. So if you're going to take music that is in another recording or something like that, make sure you get permission in some way or another. And then, of course, you have moral rights. And as an author, you have the right to paternity, which means that you get to be known for the work that you're creating. And the right of integrity, which means that nobody is able to destroy or change your work in a way that you don't want it to be. So join us for the next video, and we'll be discussing sound recordings.